Yo, 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 what is going on, COD? And I guess RoK Familia for this kind of hybrid vid. There was a post that was made on the Rise of Kingdoms group Facebook page, and I want to talk about it because it got a lot of likes, a lot of comments, and it seems to be one of these things because of so many similarities, obviously, not only in between games within the Kingdom Builder genre, as many of us play and love, but especially when we talk about the differences between Call of Dragons and Rise of Kingdoms, which are very much close, right? It's this kind of brother, sister, almost sibling like relationship where we've seen things that have been added in Call of Dragons, they eventually get added in Rise of Kingdoms. We've seen the opposite, where things get added in RoK and then they eventually come over to CoD. And so there is this very much of a symbiotic relationship, it feels like. And so I thought we would go through this post and read it, give you my thoughts, and share my feedback, and hopefully hear from you as well. And if you agree or disagree with what this original poster is saying, and any of my thoughts as well, let us know down below. And as always, if you enjoy the content, make sure you throw us up, because that helps out a lot. Thanks. Okay, here we go. So this was from Sergeant Musketeer post, and just to kind of give you an idea, right? Title is called Fix the Game. It's got 176 reactions, 101 comments, 3 shares. Again, this was posted 4 days ago here on September 28th. And again, it's not too long, but let's break this down. Then we're going to read some comments too as well. So it says, hear me or not. Okay, aggressive, but sure, why not? Rise of Kingdoms in 2025. I want to point something out here as well, is that there is kind of two ways of looking at this, right? Initially, when I had skimmed over this, I thought, well, you know, why not post this at the beginning of 2025? But then I was like, okay, well, maybe they meant this is like a recap of the year and just kind of, you know, decided, okay, let's post this in month 10 out of 12. So, but it's no longer the game it used to be. What once felt like a strategy-driven, community-based empire builder has slowly turned into a repetitive, predictable cycle that's driving players, both whales and free-to-play, away. In that case, come over to Call of Dragons. It's the future. At least, you know, currently, at the moment, until something, you know, more amazing comes out. We've always said it, right? COD's the most competitive kingdom builder, the one that has the highest quality and skill cap. However, that's neither here nor there. First, okay, but let's go into what are some of the reasons, okay, that this person feels this way. First, pilots are killing the game's spirit. This is interesting because I did a segment on pilots in COD a little while back. Account sharing and piloting are everywhere, turning fair competition into a joke. Instead of real skill and dedication, kingdoms are dominated by whoever has the time and willingness to let others play their accounts. This destroys the meaning of grinding and wipes out the sense of achievement for honest players. So let's briefly go down this, right? For those of you that are or may not be aware of piloting, right, the idea is basically pretty simple. It's just someone saying, hey, here's my login credentials. Can you log in and play for me? That's it, right? That's all it is. And what this person is referring to is essentially the kind of rampant plague. It's probably one way to put it, depending on how you feel about it, right? And where you have, let me give a very simple example. Let's say you have two top kingdoms. Let's say you have the number 1 and number 2 kingdom that are going up against each other. When you're looking at activity times across a 24-hour period, right, you might think to yourself, well, trying to have 24/7 coverage in my kingdom is ideal. And or if we can't, we need to make sure that our peak activity is so much better than our opponents that we can make up more ground than we lose on our downtime, right? Again, very kind of basic, two very basic general approaches for kingdom building when it comes to activity. And I'm not saying that those are all of them, but right, you could say like these are two of what you would say are pretty standard approaches. However, let's say that one kingdom uses pilots, whereas the other one doesn't. Well, let's say you're basically both around the same activity. It's very competitive. And it's now going to come down to who just has more skill, who maybe has better micro, who's better tactically, who's looking more at the long term or the kind of theater of war play. But then you have one of these two kingdoms that, like I said, does use pilots. And in this case, the pilots themselves are players that are playing on these accounts during one kingdom's downtime. or their inactive or lowest peak activity time. Because of this, you have a situation that makes it so now, during the downtime for arguably both the kingdoms, one of them now has better downtime, more active during their down period, and they're able to basically push and either win out the zone, maybe they zone lock them, maybe they overwhelm them in the final zone, and it basically tips the scales, right? That's like the simplest way to really put it. And that is, I can only imagine, one way that communities and kingdoms are being negatively impacted from this. Now, to be fair, I don't know if there's anything in place at the moment. I know at least for CoD, and I can say for my time playing RoK, which was again during the first couple of years of the game's release, back when it was ROC and then it transitioned to RoK, is where there really wasn't anything in place, right? There was no restrictions or limitations, right? There was nothing stopping you from saying, hey, here's my username, here's my password, right? Log into my account, you can go ahead and play it. Now, obviously, this is against TOS, at least it was for RoK, but now they have where you can do account trading and whatnot. Now, I don't know if the sharing still applies to that or not. I believe that is still the case, at least as it appears to CallofDragons. So as always, right, do things at your own risk and be wary. But yeah, I don't think that account sharing ideally is a thing that you want to be in the game. Is it something that objectively is being utilized right now by however many people? Yes. Again, let's call it how we see it. But it would be nice, and I do agree here that I do think that it is absolutely killing the game's spirit. I think it's killing the game's integrity, and I can say that for RoK and for CoD because those things are relevant in both. And I think you really need to attempt some way to address this because it is one of those difficult things. I mean, listen, this is the same thing with how I feel about like account selling, right? I think it's absolutely ridiculous. I don't think it should be in the game, and I feel the same way exactly about piloting. That isn't going to change. Now, I'm not saying like these people are awful human beings. They're just utilizing a loophole or a feature that is available to them at the moment, right? And it's kind of like the Darwinism, right? Survival of the fittest. People are just going to do whatever they can to win, or at least some people will. And I think that that's very apparent in what we're seeing now. Okay. Second, the game has become painfully repetitive. Every KVK feels the same. Build troops, march to the same objectives, fight the same way. There's no real innovation in mechanics or events, and the excitement that once hooked players is gone. The thrill of a fresh battlefield has turned into a chore. It's funny that this person says this because I had the same feeling when I started just wanting more out of RoK. And what I mean by more is on the PvP side, like tactically, strategically, what I can do with my troops. One of the things that always bugged me about RoK, and again, it's by no fault of the game or anyone, but I always felt that why am I using a ranged unit but it doesn't actually have a ranged animation? Why am I not standing far away and attacking them from distance? Like that just always, I don't know how anyone else feels if for those of you that are still playing RoK currently. But in my first couple of years of playing, that always bugged me. I cannot tell you how much that bugged me. And so for me, eventually when I moved from RoK and I went over to Infinity Kingdom, right, it was more like Lords Mobile style play, right? So there really wasn't, it was kind of just more like, shoulder to shoulder, just kind of banging the heads there. There's not really any free troop movement in that particular game. But then eventually I moved on from IK, I went over and I found CallofDragons. And this is where, for me, I was like, look, man, I'm not sitting here saying, CoD is the best kingdom builder that's ever came out, or excuse me, what I should say is I'm not out here rating it like a 10 out of 10. It has its own opportunities. We've touched on this before, but I will say that it absolutely is the best, most competitive kingdom builder on the market right now that does a lot of things that you would want it to do, especially with the fact that for the game's quality, for its aesthetic prowess at the moment, in the current state, and the fact that it has range play, I could fly, I have flying units. I mean, it's just like it gives you a lot more tactical and strategic and PvP flexibility and creativity that you can do. And so I absolutely, it's so funny because I absolutely agree here is that, and again, I think you will see more innovation, right? Like eventually, whoever knows how long it's going to be, there's going to be a game that looks at a game like CallofDragons and says, man, the game has a good foundation, but let's do things better, right? Let's build on that. And then eventually that's going to be the next best big competitive kingdom builder that comes out, right? Who knows when that will be, but right, I always joke around. I'm like, dude, if I hit the lotto, I would respectfully, and again, I love CoD, I love RoK, but dude, like if I won the lotto and I was able to design my own kingdom builder, like I would crush these games, like in the best way, right? On delivering features and doing things that the community would absolutely love. And it just, anyways, with all of that, I digress. Point being, is that I absolutely agree here on the second point. Is I can only imagine. Now, I don't know how much new things when it comes to KVK that RoK has done in the past couple years recently, right? To be fair. However, I know at least when I had played for the first couple years, at least until you started seeing new KVK storylines coming out, that's where you were able to get some of the creativity. But I can understand where this person is saying is like sometimes maybe you're playing the same storyline or you're only playing a couple of the same storylines over and over, and you are noticing some level of repetitiveness. Part of me almost feels like it kind of is what it is, unless they are going to take steps to improve some of these things. And I almost wish that this person would have came out and said, like, here's one idea that they could do that would just allow for so much more creativity, so much more flexibility that can be done. Again, maybe someone will say that in the comments, but I do generally, on a foundational level, agree here with the second point. Number third, even whales are quitting. Pay-to-win players who once kept the game alive are realizing that no matter how much money they spend, the cycle of repetitive KVKs, endless migration, and toxic politics never changes. When the big spenders start retiring, it's a red flag that the game's core appeal has collapsed. Interesting. Now, you're always going to hear about pay-to-win players joining a game, leaving a game. To me, that's not really anything new, right? People can fall out of love with the game or fall out of interest with the game for any number of reasons. But it is true that depending on certain features that are released, and what is coming to a game or being removed or maybe negatively impacted, kind of a nerf change that's that's going to be coming, those are things that can increase and speed up the rate of which people stop playing and quit, whether they are spenders or not. I think for this one, right, and this is the second time you're hearing this person now talk about repetitive KVKs. I think it would be interesting to see, like, what are the main takeaways? Like, what are the main pain points when it comes to the repetitiveness that people find in the KVKs? Is it literally the fact that the map layout, even though if it's different, it's not really adding anything creatively when it comes to PvP and just like the competitive battlefield? Is it that there's not really any difference in the troops themselves? Maybe there's nothing happening there with, are there time, like for example, in COD, we have, artifacts where you can, kind of activate these on a time basis, right? Or you have control of this, so you can kind of activate it whenever you want, adding for a level of real-time action that can be done, right? So you can time these things out on when you want to use them. Being able to have flying units so you can go over mountains, for example, right? To like spawn camp people at a pass or like flank a supply line. Maybe you split them up and you're just kind of picking off gatherers, or you're going after solo units, right? Kind of blitzkrieging. Even just from a flying perspective, there's multiple approaches that you have to tactical and strategic flexibility. Again, I don't know exactly what all those things are in RoK. It would have been nice if some of those things were listed, but the endless migration, yeah, listen, that is just a fact. I mean, migration, it's just and this is something that I do believe can be fixed. I think that there are things that you need to do on the migration side of kingdoms where, for example, I'll give you one example of something that I think absolutely can do so much good for kingdoms when it comes to migration, and when it comes not only to the individuals and the players, right, to reduce the likelihood of migration. and increase player retention within kingdoms, which therefore will reduce migration by default, regardless of how much of a percentage it does, is if you do something, for example, where you allow kingdoms to have like a migration recruitment board and migration recruitment details. So you allow people to basically, like, if I was to zoom out and I was to look at a kingdom list for RoK or a kingdom list for Call of Dragons, and they actually had this in Infinity Kingdom for a little while. It's one of the features I really liked about it, is you could click on the kingdom, and then an info page would pop up, and you could have a kingdom announcement board. I think they called it a declaration, I believe, in Infinity Kingdom, from what I recall. And you could basically put in your information. Like, you could put in like your recruitment information, who to contact, a little bit of information about your kingdom. They need something like this in Call of Dragons and Rise of Kingdoms, where you have a board, you have maybe there's different fields. Like, for example, you can have like expectations. Maybe it's types of player or player preferences that you're looking to recruit. Things that resemble more of a recruitment, like a job posting, if you will. These are things, because if you can, the idea is you need to know before you go, right? And what that means is that if you can get as much information about a kingdom before you migrate there, before you even reach out to someone, that can help a lot in figuring out which kingdoms you want to go to. And also, at the same time, one of the most challenging parts about migration is, because there's so many kingdoms out there, there's a number of players that just feel overwhelmed because there's so many options, or they feel like there's not enough quality options, because not every single kingdom is going to have recruiters that are going to be posting on the official RoK Discord or the official CoD Discord, or in any and all of the general most likely used recruitment places that you would do these things in. So I think that there needs to be an improvement to how recruiting and how migration can be done in game as well, by having a more of, again, this kind of a recruitment / migration system that makes it easier for like players to almost like filter and sort kingdoms based on what they're looking for, right? And it's almost kind of like if you want to go and you're searching for a restaurant, and you know how there's a lot of filters. You can choose the cuisine. You can choose, do you want indoor, outdoor? Are they doing do they have a special experience, right? Like some kind of like a prefix or a per person menu. If it's like a 3-course or a 4-course, you could select the ambiance. Do you want something more romantic? Do you want something that's like a neighborhood gem? Do you want the most popular? That is kind of what they need to do in order to take some steps to help and I think fix this area. And that's just one idea, right? I could go on, but let me not make this too long. And the toxic politics never changes. Okay, this is a big one, because usually the politics portion falls more on kingdom management. So you're not necessarily going to see political stuff happening at like the R1, R2, R3 level. It's going to usually be happening at the officer, whether that's an R5 or R4, R5, or an R5, R6 level, depending on the game. But usually it's an officer and then a leadership or a leader level, and then depending on how many alliances you have in the kingdom, it might be 2 or more alliances, or it might be just limited to 1. And if there's anyone else that assists in kingdom management, that might not necessarily be an officer, because maybe you have more people that help out, whether it's on a volunteer basis or they're there permanently, even if they're not within management within the specific alliance in game, right? So they could be an R3, but they could be helping out in the department within your kingdom. The challenge with this, and again, I agree here. My time in RoK, I ran, I think, 5 or 6 jumper projects, building them from the ground up. And it's a lot of work when you think about what you're putting in before you even land in a kingdom, and then even more so once you do land in a kingdom, right? I did a couple projects in Infinity Kingdom. I think I've done 1. I think we did 1 or 2 so far in Call of Dragons. And when you're just talking about building a management team, you're almost kind of like building a management team for your business, right? In real life, there's a lot that you have to consider and you have to think about. There's so many similarities across the board. And when you think about, and again, I can only imagine what they mean, right? Because it wasn't like they gave any examples. But I'll just say that some of the worst case things that can happen from just, again, having toxic politics is KVK. Diplomacy can break down, and you can get unfavored matchups or end up being incredibly overpowered and not getting any fights or steamrolled. Number 2, your kingdom can have development issues and stagnate if you have problems with toxic politicking or politics within your kingdom. if you don't agree on a lot of things, if you're having rifts that happen, those are things that can stall development. It can cause people just to not want to have to deal with that, and they just may consider leaving and migrating out. Number three, you could potentially go into civil war within your home kingdom, and then everything's basically shite at that point. And now it's like a massive regime change. You end up and you can have situations happen where like the new regime takes over and the grass isn't greener on the other side, and then all of a sudden now people realize like, man, that wasn't the worst thing, that was like the worst thing that could have happened. Or again, maybe in some cases it works out and ends up being for the better, but the problem is that now you have a divide between people that might have been on one side and people on the other side. So you're kind of almost segregating your kingdom in a sense, because of those things that can happen where you're kind of forming factions, and it's kind of a lose-lose and not really a win-win or a win-loss option. And those are just to kind of talk about some things that can happen from that. I'm sure some of you probably have other examples. And then let's get into the last one, which is fourth. Free-to-play players are dying out. I could talk about this for a lot. I'll try and limit it a little bit here. But I want to see what this person said. They can't keep up with the gap. And I think this is like referring to like the power gap, the power creep, right? From when you're starting as a new account, and then where can you get by the time you get into like your SOC or your SOS? Because I think for RoK, it's Season of Conquest. For us, it's Season of Strife in CoD. So they can't keep up with the gap. And when whales leave, free-to-play lose the leaders. I mean, to a degree. I mean, I will say, I think if you're talking about successful top kingdoms, probably in both games, most likely the people that are leading are probably going to be at least a light spender or higher. Doesn't mean that free-to-play can't be leads, because they can, but it's probably more likely that it is people that spend. Free-to-play lose the leaders, spenders, and structure that kept kingdoms competitive. Without balance and real support for free-to-play growth, the player base shrinks on both ends. And I think probably the easiest way of looking at this is when you think about what are all the ways that as a free-to-play player, someone who doesn't spend any money at all, is gaining power. Like have you been able, like for example, are players reaching T5 faster now compared to years ago? And I can tell you, as someone who pulls this data, like I love looking at these types of things historically, right? And I tried to look at this in Rise of Kingdoms, but apparently no one keeps track of this. Like I was shockingly appalled. And I actually started pulling some data together for Rise of Kingdoms. And if I ever do start doing content again, which I would love to, once I hopefully get some data stuff together, then this is something I would love to come out with. But on the COD side, I can tell you, I keep track, right? I have a group on my Discord, which is basically for the top free-to-play players in the game. I think you have to be over like 25 million power, but once you hit that, you can like reach out to me. I'll invite you to the group. You have to send me screenshots, and I have to verify, of course. But I also have a list of like the top 25 or 50 free-to-play players in the game. I have a list of the total amount of players in the game that have reached out to me and said, I've unlocked my first T5 unit, and the amount of people that have said, I've unlocked all the T5 units. And I keep track of like, how long did it take you to do that? What was the date you hit? What was your power? The alliance you were in? What was your, like, again, I keep some stats on this. And I can tell you from someone who keeps stats on this, that the rate that free-to-play, at least in CallofDragons, right, for the 2+ years the game's been out so far, the rate in which free-to-play players are unlocking their first T5 and all of their T5s, because keep in mind, there's only about a handful of people right now in the 2+ years that have unlocked all the T5 units. So if we just go off of people that have hit their first T5 unit, the rate at which this is happening might only be a tiny bit faster. And I think that very much speaks to the fourth point here, which is that you would imagine that you would need to be hitting this faster. Like I think when you put things into perspective, it's like this idea of, and I've said this before, when you think about the fact that like one of the things, I've pushed for in COD, and other people have echoed this as well, is doing something where you add all of the legendary heroes after a period of time to where they can be accessed and acquired in gold chests, right, from just standard pools. And this doesn't mean that a free-to-play player is all of a sudden going to max out every single legendary hero that's in existence. It is still going to take them a stupidly long amount of time to do this. However, it is borderline asinine to me on how something this basic hasn't been done yet, from what I understand, in RoK and or in CoD. Like, all of a sudden, just because you're adding all the legendaries in there, regardless if they are spend gated or pay to win gated or not, like, that's all of a sudden going to massively, make free to play all of a sudden more competitive, and they're just going to start outpowering or being able to outsustain, right? Because that's really what you're talking about for the most part, right? Spenders. Like, no, not at all. But what it does is it allows for them to at least be a little bit more relevant and be able to keep up, at least in some way, with what the meta might be, as long as it doesn't massively change, right? Depending on what the year is or when new heroes are coming out, and or at least allow for them to do something where, one, again, my whole thing is the fact that it takes this long for a free-to-play to hit T5 is absolutely ridiculous, right? You're talking like a year and a half, 2 years on average. And that's if you're in a spending alliance. For people that are not in spending alliances, like if you're in a low spending alliance to basically a no spending alliance, it can take you longer than that. Again, so it doesn't do anything. I completely agree here. Like, it eviscerates a free-to-play player's motivation. Like, I can tell you, I've had a number of people that reach out to me that are free-to-play, and they tell me, they go out of their way to say, boss, thank you so much for actually doing something for free-to-play, giving them recognition, like literally going out of your way to do things for them that shouts them out and gives them a stage, right? Gives them a platform to stand on. And again, if I was still doing content for RoK, I would have been doing these things as well, because I just love doing these things. But I do agree generally, and I don't know all of the power creep changes or limitations in RoK as of late, because again, there have obviously been a number of patches and developments in there. But I can tell you, at least on the COD side, that there needs to be massive improvements, right? And we're not saying in any way, shape, or form that a free-to-play should be able to keep up with someone who is a low spend, and maybe even more than that, right? Obviously a mid or high spend. But I do think that there should be things that you can do when depending on how you value your time and and the return on investment you're getting from that as a free-to-play player. Because keep in mind, everyone starts out as a free-to-play until you actually start spending money. So for me, it's, right, how can you create things where you can basically trade, right, your time that you're investing in the game for more progression? And I think that the rate and the ratio right there is obscenely too wide right now. Like, I would almost say, like, the rate for time investment to what you're getting out of it is probably like 1,000 to 1, right? With like 1,000 being the level of what you're getting in and 1 what you're getting back for free to play. And maybe some people think it's more, maybe some people think it's less. But like, to me, that's how it kind of feels, at least when it comes. And maybe 1,000 to 1 is a little bit high. But, maybe it's more like 100 to 1. And I'd be curious what you all think, depending on the game that you play. But yeah, it absolutely needs to be improved. And then obviously ending this out, in short, Rise of Kingdoms is bleeding from every side. Pilots ruined fairness. Repetition kills fun. Whales burn out. And free-to-play lose hope. Lilith has to act now to bring fresh content, punish account sharing, create fairer systems, and find new ways to make the game engaging. I think generally speaking, that's what everyone kind of wants out of their game, right? Is to hopefully keep going in an upward positive direction versus, declining. So yeah, I want to read just some of these comments here. The thrill of a fresh battlefield has turned into a chore. I feel this in my soul. RoK is like an unhealthy relationship. You want to quit, but you've put so many hours grinding money, you just can't. Shaking my head. I thought when I was small player years ago that once my account was older, better, I wouldn't have to put so much time into it. I'm 81 mil power now on a homegrown low spend account, and the time requirements have not changed. Having to compete with all the bot old whale accounts is exhausting. How can you compare a homegrown account to an account that's 2 years or more older than mine that a whale once built? And the irony is it's all about the KP, and more likely than not, the person playing the account didn't gain a quarter of the KP on that account. Rant over. I think the biggest issues are the matchmaking that encourages cramping into small seeds. Well, interesting. I'd love to almost hear a little bit more about that. And the shrinking, don't want to say dying player base while increasing to having even more servers. And the merging is absolutely something that has needed to happen in RoK. I'm sure probably since like the first year, and I'm happy that it's happening faster in CoD than it is in RoK. Like make migration free, shut down like 1/3 of the servers, or maybe even everything that is currently DC'd, and merge. And this is funny because I basically have a similar belief when it comes to like just merging all the DCs. There's no point in having any of those, right? Like you want to try and create you want to try and put kingdoms in a position to basically like where they're all eventually becoming A's or all ABs, and then you're at least nurturing a new starting point for the Bs to try and improve from there. But it does nothing when you have a power gap. And we've talked about this before in COD, where you have A and B seed kingdoms, but you have the power range between an A seed kingdoms, between the A seed kingdom pool is like 15 billion power, right? Like you can have the top one that's at like 29, 30 billion, and then the bottom's at 15 or 16 billion. Then you look at the B seeds and you got a 16 billion power gap between the top B and the bottom B. It does nothing. Like it's just way too wide. So yeah, I agree. No one forced you to play. Only problem is bad matchmaking. Matchmaking is the worst. How they managed to put 4 good kingdom in one camp and 3 DW farmer kingdom with 1 good kingdom in the other camp. And this is interesting to hear this because these are almost similar challenges that COD has faced when it comes to matchmaking. Like there are better ways to do it. And well, I don't know how I should say better ways. The challenge is that you need to not have such power gaps in the kingdoms in order to improve the quality of matchmaking, right? Like there's a big difference between having, 10 or 15 kingdoms that are between 20, 30 billion and 25 billion power compared to then having the rest of those kingdoms where the power just starts dropping, more significantly. And you only have, and if you have 100 kingdoms in the pool and you have, 10, 15% of them are, but the top, between 5 billion power at the top, and then it starts dropping off, or maybe a little less than that, you have to pair people with people. But the problem is that the power gap within a kingdom pool is just too wide, or in a KVK matchmaking, or in a kingdom pool that's going into KVK matchmaking, I should say. So it sounds like it's about the same in RoK. Still the biggest game of its genre. It is, absolutely. I don't think that, but again, even with that being said, it doesn't mean that it's devoid of improvements. And I think the community is pretty spot on here. I agree it's beyond repetitive. They need to switch things up, add new ideas ASAP, especially in KVK. Ban those Deke, Sender, and Maniacs in the saw. Wait, what? A few of it like Spender from our Kingdom chatted. Some woman is saying, "Oh, okay, yeah, let's move on." I can agree about pilots, but also who ultimately can stop me from sharing my information. And again, Katie brings up a really good point. Katie, what up, girl? But yeah, this is exactly what we were saying earlier. For my account that I may or may not spend my money on, what I do with my things isn't anyone else's concern, really. They just need to find a way where free-to-play can still enjoy the game. Maybe even make a free-to-play KVK story where no bundles pop, etc., where everyone is free-to-play in that story, so Crystal Tech and things are fairly even type of thing. This is funny because we did a video on like, should you have like a completely free-to-play server, right, where no one could spend money on them, but you do it like 1 out of every 100. Like 1 out of every 100 kingdoms is just a free-to-play kingdom. So like no one can spend any money on those kingdoms at all, even if they're just doing it as like a test, right? Just to like test out how it would be and get some feedback and see if maybe they increase the rate. Now maybe it's 1 out of every 50 kingdoms, right, is going to be completely free to play, and just see, does it do anything or not? Does it improve the overall state? To me, I just think it would be interesting as a test, right? There's also too much farming bots. Lilith needs to make an auto farming mechanism that's usable on a phone or iPad and give more speeds to free to play with less healing costs. Literally farm for 2 months with 1 man for it's constantly and can still barely compete. RSS for healing is never an issue. It's speeds to heal. It's BS. I mean, RoK is not free to play friendly anymore. Yeah, I mean, I think there's a number of things that you could improve on the free to play side, and even on COD, it pretty much I have to imagine is basically the same thing, right? You're either deprived of RSS, you're deprived of speeds to train at that point, and it's just, yeah. I mean, and keep in mind, you also have to acknowledge fairly on the other side that free to play should not be able to compete with people that are spending, but they also shouldn't be so widely deprived of being able to play the game where, to me, the extreme example is this. you spend an entire season training, like in your home kingdom, right? Like let's say it's season 1. You spend your entire time leveling up, training as many troops as you can, trying to get to CH25 or as high as you can. First KVK comes around. Do you even have enough troops to field 5 full marches? Right? And that's of, like T4s. Maybe it's T3s. Probably not. And then if you do have enough, can you field 5 full marches longer than 1 outing? And I feel like that's really the question, like asking the right questions and understanding what the real livelihood is. What is the real day-to-day experience and struggles for free-to-play that is impacting? Because I can tell you right now, that is an absolutely sucky feeling. And even if you are free to play and you've been playing for multiple seasons and you have, or let's say you have T5 unlocked, you're investing, you're training as much as you can, you're min-maxing, etc. You're taking advantage of events, training periods, all that stuff, buffs, titles, etc. Right? How long has it taken you to get to a point where you can field 5 or 6 marches, a full T5? And then once you get there, how long can you last with that? Can you last 1 or 2 outings? Is it only 1? Is it 2? Is it maybe 3, right? With fully maxed out troops in each of your march. It's just, the funny, and that's to me like the extreme side is you're doing all this investment, all this work for literally 10 minutes, 5 or 10 minutes in a KVK, right? And then now you can't full field anymore. And now, again, I don't know if it's that extreme, when I have to imagine at a certain point it probably is, or up until a certain point it is. But like that to me, I think is almost an easier way to understand the free-to-play struggles, right? Okay, this person had a long one. This may be the last one we'll read. I played RoK 7 years, and I can say this game is still very attractive to me. You need to balance your time and contribution to suitable kingdom. Of course, big kingdom require big time. Big contribution will make pressure for normal player. Agreed. Smaller kingdom will require less time. If you cannot bear pressure from Imperium, go low seed kingdom and play for more suitable. Lilith already has many great updates, such as increase RSS return, help everybody cost less RSS, adjust tech KVK, help more tanky with flag player, not make big whale burn everything. Easy as before. Make a new war map for whale versus whale. Whale has more reward deserved to their spending. Add reward 20k gems, 50k gem in level war S and S plus Imperiums. It makes players contribute many in big war, has more rewards. Reduce time registration KVK. Force low seed in Death Kingdom must join KVK sooner, not farmer only. Okay. Probably would have to dive a little bit into a couple of those things. I think at face value, I understand a few of them. Almost wish there was maybe a little bit more detail there off of going. However, they will ask you to fix your credit card first, learn from us, quit the game. I mean, yeah. I'd love to know what some of you think. To me, it almost feels like I would love to almost sit down with some people from RoK, people that have been playing for a while, that are like purely free to play, and then people that spend, and maybe some people in the middle, just to kind of almost, it feels like have like a good quality conversation on like what are some of the struggles and what are some things that you think could, like, just almost kind of having like a round table. Like those conversations to me, I think are absolutely fantastic. Just kind of being able to think tank and really hear from the community on like, what are these struggles that are happening? Because I feel like those are very connectable pieces to people that play Rise of Kingdoms, Call of Dragons, any other kingdom builder for that matter. Because it almost feels like someone is saying what you feel. And because of that, it's familiar. And it's very comfortable. It's almost warming and endearing to hear that you're not alone in how you feel about the game and what is or is not limiting or kind of hurting your progression. So yeah, that's going to be it for me. This turned out a little bit longer than I thought, but I'd love to know your thoughts. Let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. That's it for me. As always, until next time, we'll catch you later.